Hello, and thank you for joining me for Excel charts. Today we're going to be discussing the basics of creating and editing charts in Excel. We're going to be using Excel 2016 for this demonstration, but everything that we talk about should work on any version of Excel released in the last 10 years. We'll be going over how to edit the appearance of the data, how to add new data, how to adapt your charts, change the types, and set up defaults to make things faster and easier for you. There will be a lot of hands-on exercises provided, and we'll make these available for download through our website. With that, let's go ahead and begin. Before we begin actually creating a chart, it's important to talk about how the data is laid out. You want to have this organized in a logical way where you have the labels appropriately attached to your data. You also want to make sure you don't have any blank spaces, columns or rows, or just empty spaces within it. Now, different data is going to require different layouts, and that's fine, and you can adjust things and make changes as you go, but it will be simplest if you have everything grouped together right at the beginning, so when you want to, you can easily drag across and highlight like that without having any missing parts or anything that you have to work around. We'll talk later on about how you can select the data that you want after the chart has been created and make changes in those ways. You can see sometimes you have different formatting for the data. That is not necessary to do, but that will be pulled into the chart with the labels when you have the formatting built in. So sometimes people find it easier to change the formatting in the data sheet that we were looking at here rather than in the chart after it's been created. Now, the title at the top here, you might see for this library programs chart that I've made here, is useful from an information point of view, but unlikely to be grabbed and pulled into the chart as it's automatically created. That's okay. That's something that we can add manually later on. You'll see this as we go, and you'll see how we highlight things that we choose to put them in the appropriate place. And sometimes because of the layout or the arrangement of the information, you don't want to grab it. It just adds problems where you don't necessarily need them. Now, once you have organized your data and entered things in, we're ready to insert a chart. This is something, by the way, that you can do before your data is complete. If you know that you're going to be adding more things later on, that's okay. A lot of times we have charts that track the progress of things over time. You want to see growth, whether the use of something is going up or down, whether sales are increasing or decreasing, whatever it may be. And you can always add more data later on, or you can adjust the existing data. That's perfectly okay. These are dynamic, which means that they're not fixed like a picture. They change as we make changes to them. So I am going to, starting with this chart, I'm going to highlight the data that I want here, and we are going to insert this chart in. Now, some of you who have done this before, you might know some shortcuts. You might know that you can press F11 and that will automatically generate a chart. I will warn laptop users that sometimes the F keys, the function keys that go across the top there, have predetermined values for the model of laptop that you're using, and the F11 might not work for you. You can also do Alt F1. That will generate a chart within the spreadsheet, whereas F11 makes it its own tab here. Either of those are perfectly fine if you like to use them as shortcuts. I like to use them myself, they're very helpful, but for the first time through, I'm going to show you how you do this using the ribbon across the top. So we're going to take the mouse and click on the Insert tab right here at the top, and you see a bunch of different things that you can insert into the table. You see pivot tables and pivot table charts, which are a little bit beyond the scope of today's class, pictures, other things from the store, other add-ins you might want, and then we see charts. Now you see recommended charts and a bunch of different chart types available here. If you were trying to do this in a hurry, you could very simply click recommended chart, and you'd see different options that they make available. And I could say take that one and say OK, and there's our chart. Now I'm going to delete this. I'm going to go back and show you if you want to look at all of your options. We can go to the same place, again insert, and then at charts in the bottom right hand corner, I click on that and I see all charts. Now it goes right back to recommended charts again. That is something that you see in Excel 2013 and newer. If we go to all charts, we will see all the different categories. I'm going to do a quick rundown of some of the more commonly used ones here. I will give a little warning at the top that I am not a statistician. I am a computer scientist, and I've been working with Excel for over 20 years. But some of the mathematical aspects of this, there are people who could give you more detailed explanations than I will. So we're just giving you some basics here and some ideas of what you might want to use. Now, starting on the left-hand side, reading from the top to bottom, you see recent. That goes to charts that you've used recently. If this is something that you do frequently, we're all creatures of habit. We do the same things over and over again. That might be a nice shortcut for you to get back to what you want. We're starting from scratch here with this demo, so I'm not going to do that. Templates we'll talk about a little bit later on. That's something that you can create on your own if you do things routinely. We will come back to that. Now, column is probably the most commonly used type of charts. These are, as you see, the bar charts comparing things, and you see different examples of them here. And we can see if we go across here, there are different kinds of column charts. The first one is the standard two things next to each other comparing options there. The second one is if you combine the two. So if you wanted to know cumulatively what's going on here. This wouldn't be appropriate for this data, but there are charts that I do where I use that combined option to do this. For example, when I'm looking at lab activity, sometimes I like to do comparisons including the time spent on the computers, the pages print, and the money spent in the lab all stacked together in one big thing so I can see each month very clearly. So there are times when that can be helpful. The next one over is showing percentage values of things, and so how they compare to each other on this. So if the staff hours for computer classes are higher than the staff hours for book clubs, you can see that percentage shifts up and how it adjusts accordingly. This is a little bit trickier from a math point of view, but it's available there. We have the 3D models. These generally aren't terribly well received. They're a bit hard to look at. If you're doing something where you have elaborate graphics coming across the screen, this might be helpful for you, but from a readability point of view, these can be pretty tough. So generally speaking, I don't use these, especially you see when you have the one bar in front of the other, that can be pretty hard to read. So I'm going to stick with the basic one for right now for what we're doing, but before I finish, I do want to run over a couple of the other choices here. Line charts. These are really good for for tracking progress over time. It's not appropriate for the data that we have here. We're comparing different things in this data, but if you had, say, a balance and in investments and you wanted to see if that was going up or down and what rate it was going up at over time, that can be a great chart for that. Pie charts are good if you want to show the distribution of things. So if you're wondering how, say, for example, these staff hours are being spent at different programs, the pie chart might be useful for that. It doesn't really make sense for attendance. That's not how attendance works for things. We're not taking out of a cumulative pie. But pie charts are very good for things like budgets or scheduling needs, deploying resources, stuff like that. Pie charts are ideal. And you can see they have 3D versions of it as well, separated out with each bar has its own division. And the donut chart, which is, as you might guess, a pie chart with a hole in the middle. But sometimes it can be easier to read if you attach the labels in certain ways. You can have them going to different sections there. And you notice the nice concentric rings that you get with it, with multiple strings. Bar charts are just like column charts, but sideways. There are a little bit more subtlety sometimes to that, but really, if you look through these, they're just sideways column charts. Area is similar to line charts, but it fills in underneath. Sometimes this can work as a better graphic representation for things than the lines jutting around, but for the most part they function a lot like line charts. Sometimes the graphics can be confusing for those. You got to choose what's appropriate for the data. These others are getting a little bit more complicated and a little bit beyond the scope of today's class. I will mention a couple of interesting ones. The scatter plots, if you take in a lot of different data points, say, for example, here at the library, sometimes we do surveys and we ask people their interest levels in different things, and so we might have several hundred data points, and they're not all going to be in a straight line, but you can see clusters in one area or another, and so you know, okay, that's something that a lot of people want to know more about. So scatter points can be good ways of making sense out of large volumes of data. And radar charts can be interesting in that they can show areas of emphasis. These are good for things like personnel reviews or health charts, things like that, where people are trying to figure out what they need to improve on, what they need to work on. Radar charts can very often provide interesting information with that, but not appropriate for the data that we're working with today. Finally, the combo we will come back to later on. That is if you wanted to have multiple different chart types within the same thing. So as I said, we're going to come back to that one a little bit later in the class, as that is a slightly more advanced topic. So I'm going to go back to column, and we're going to start with this, and I will choose the first one they offer and say OK. And there's our column chart. We have now created that, and we've inserted that in. A couple of things that I want to point out once we have inserted that. You can see the Chart Tools tab has appeared in our ribbon at the top here, and it has two different tabs that we will look at here. We're going to focus mainly on design today. We'll look briefly at format, but the design is the more key elements of what we're going to be working with. So we're going to take a long look at that. A couple of other things that I want to show you as this appears. You can see there's some information that is not quite filled in. You can see the chart title is there. We can change that later on. We also see that it appeared in this box. We can move this around, so if we needed to arrange them differently. To move it around, you don't want to be on the absolute edge, but you want to be close to it, and you get that arrow, that four-tailed arrow that looks like a compass that you can then drag and drop wherever you want that to go. We also see some options that we have here on the side, we're going to use those. There are equivalents to those up here at the top as well. So you don't have to use these buttons if you don't see them on yours. They are in the ribbon as well. Now, very quickly, without all my talking, we could have had that up in a couple of seconds. We've created this chart here that's given us a visual representation, and we can see what is bringing in more attendance and what is using more staff time. You might say it's kind of hard to read the staff time, and you would not be wrong. And I will show you how to change that later on when we get some more adjusting with these. But that gives us our quickly inserted chart here. Now what I would like to do is to go through all of the key options that we have across the top bar in the ribbon. Let's work our way across the ribbon from left to right, and we'll talk about the different things that we have here. Now, the first thing that we see is Add Chart Element. That actually is the same thing that we see if we click on the plus button here. So I'm going to show it to you from both directions. The chart elements are parts of a chart that you can have visible. Right now you see already checked are the axis, the chart title, the grid lines, and the legend. The legend is the explanation at the bottom of what the colors mean. The grid lines are these lines going across that we see sideways here. The chart title is what we see saying chart title and blank there. And the axis is the value going up and down there and side to side there. So you see if I uncheck any of those, they just go away. And it changes accordingly. Now you notice that all of these things have little flyaway arrows to the right of them where you can add more options to it. So I could choose to say take the horizontal one off. That's a little confusing. We can't see what's what. But I could say take the vertical one off, and if we don't care about the numbers, that might be easy to read there. Sometimes you make changes to one thing and you no longer need the other information. For example, if I were to come here and add data labels. Now I've got the numbers associated with all of these, and so I could say, oh, well, in that case, I don't really need the numbers down the side, do I? Other times we just make changes for aesthetic reasons. Right now, if I click on center, the numbers go into the center of it. Inside end goes there, inside base goes to the bottom, outside end goes where it was before, data callout, it looks like that. It all depends on your chart and what you want to have in there. For this is looking a little cluttered with it like that. I would probably go like this and say outside end. Whoops. Yeah. It's giving me a little trouble. I'll turn those off, turn them back on. There we go. But if I decided I wanted to get rid of the axis entirely, maybe I would want that data call out to identify what each of these are, or if it was a bigger chart size. You're going to find that when working with things like line charts where there's a lot of data points, you're probably not going to want to have the data labels because it will be very difficult to read and confusing. However, when you're working with something like a pie chart where you just see the slices of them and it's not always easy to tell if one is larger than the other, the data labels can be very helpful, particularly if you change them to percentages so you can compare them for all the other slices of the pie. Now you can choose to add axis titles if you want. So if you want to have an explanation of what's going on there, I think these are fairly straightforward and easy to understand. But if I chose to add this, I could put in a title saying something along the lines of program names, and I could say program attendance or whatever I wanted to have there. I'm going to turn that off because I don't think it's appropriate for this chart. Data table shows you the information underneath. I very rarely want to have the data table. The whole idea of the charts is to make it visually easier to see than just looking at the data table, but there are times when that can be helpful. Error bars, that's a mathematical thing. It can show you estimations of differences in measurement. It's not really appropriate for this data. The grid lines, if we wanted to, we could alter the details of it. We could have minor horizontal as well, and so you could see lots of little lines in there separating things out. I don't think that's necessary for this. I think the bars are fairly easy to read, but you do have that choice. And the legend, if you wanted to, we could take a look at that, and we could move this around to wherever we thought was appropriate. Now, the more options brings this up. I'm going to show you an easier way to get to this later on, but the formatting tool and the other options that we have here can come up anytime you choose more options or formatting. Finally, a trend line, that's something that we use typically with things like line charts where we want to show progress over time. But if you check that, you can see, do you want to have the trend line for attendance or staff hours? I'm going to do it for attendance, and you can see in that direction they seem to be going down, but that doesn't make a lot of sense here because this is not a trend. These are simply different programs, and so it wouldn't be appropriate here. If you're measuring one thing and how it changes over time, trend lines can be very helpful, especially when the numbers are jagged. You can get an overall view of are things getting better or worse. So those are the chart elements. As I said, you can get to that same thing clicking here, but I find it to be a little bit more visual when it's right in the chart as we're looking through it there. Now the quick layout allows us to quickly change the appearance of this to several predetermined options. All of these things can be edited with the formatting tool that I'm going to show you in just a moment, but sometimes it's nice to use the pre-built choices that they have available for us. See, some of these look better than others in my opinion. I could change it to say this. Doesn't matter, personal preference depends on the data that you have and how you like it to look. And then we have the change the colors. And you see there are lots of color schemes available here. Again, these things may seem silly at times, like you're worrying about things that don't matter, but the whole point of charts is they are visual representations, so we want them to look nice. And in addition to the color change options that we have here, grab one of these, we can also go into the chart styles. And you can see lots of changes that we can make here. You can go to the negative appearance. If those aren't enough, you can click on the down arrow and you can see some more options as we go through this. I'll take that one just so we can see the difference. That's a little hard to read. I'll go with that one. And so when you get a preview of it when you hover over it, but then when you click on it, then you actually secure that and you keep that as the setting. Now, switch row and column data isn't really appropriate for this data, but when you click on that, you can see how it changes things around. So instead of being a list of programs and comparing them by attendance and staff hours, when I click that, it suddenly, there it goes, switches it to showing attendance, and you can see the programs listed in the legend. So two different ways to display the same information. Sometimes one works better than the others, depending on how you want to present it and depending on how you want to set up the different axes of information there. Finally, we have select data here. Not finally, I do have one more hidden over there that I want to show you. My apologies. But I click select data, and this gives you the option of changing where the data range is. So if you made a mistake initially or if new information was added, you can plug it right in here. So say someone had come to this chart and put in movie night. And this brought in 42 people and only took 2 staff hours. I could come here, again selecting the chart. You notice that when I click outside of the chart tools go away. But when I come here and I click on the chart, I can now again go to design and select data. And I can change this from right now it's from A2 to C7. I could change that and change that to C8, and that goes one row further down. And now we have movie night appearing there as well. So it's as simple as that to change the data by going to select data. You notice other things that you can change here. You could add additional series if you wanted. So if there was another line, say over here, you could choose to add it and select you'd give the series a name and then you would enter in the values for it. That's not something that we can do with this particular chart, but you do have that option. You can also uncheck any of these that you don't want to appear and say OK, and then they're gone. And I can go back to select data and check those again. So you can add and remove whatever information seems appropriate. You can even, if we wanted to demonstrate how to add in a series, I could add in a series and call it staff hours repeat. And for the series value, I can click that and then select those values. My mistake. There we go. And now when I click OK, you got to watch out for little mouse slips like that. Now we see staff hours repeat, and they're all filled in there. So we now have a third series as well. That, of course, doesn't make sense with this data. We don't need to duplicate anything, so I could select this and choose remove. So that way we can use the select data to add and remove things. So if we came along here and put in cost and typed in some dollar values, now I will go ahead and change those to be currency by highlighting that and go to the number formatting and select currency here. Now I can come here and select data by going to Design, Select Data. I can add an entry. I'll call this Cost. I'll select there. I say OK. And now I see cost entered in. Now, I'm going to get back to that. Now, finally, I want to show you with the design options, change chart type. We've already talked about that, but I do want to show you something else. We talked about combo right at the start, and I mentioned that we would come back to this later. This is if you want to have one of your data categories be a different kind of chart from the other one. So I choose combo, and I could choose to leave attendance as a clustered column, as it is right now, but I could change staff hours to be whatever I wanted, a line, a different column, anything that works here. In my experience with these, I find that having it being something dramatically different makes it easier to read. So line is a good choice because it will stand out from the other one there. Now, this is a key point. If you want to add a secondary axis, this is one way that you can do that. And you would want to do this if the metric that you are measuring these on is very different from one bar to the other. So for the attendance, we are talking numbers between 40 and 150. For the staff time, we are talking numbers between 2 and 12. And so it's hard to see the staff time. It's squeezed down there at the bottom. And this can be even more dramatic when you have larger numbers involved in things. So putting in a secondary axis can make it easier to see the other bar. You see, the attendance is still scaled on the first axis there, whereas the staff hours are scaled on the secondary one there. So that can be a helpful tool when you're working with the design choices there. So I say OK, and now that change has been made as well. And the last thing that I want to show you is the Move Chart option. Right now it is an object in Sheet 1. If you want, you can make it its own chart, sorry, its own worksheet, its own tab here at the bottom, and you can give it a name. You see right now it says Chart 1. I can change that to Library Programs. And I say OK. And now it is its own chart. So that's how we can use the Design tab going across here. Now let's take a couple of minutes and talk about formatting options. Let's talk about the formatting choices that we have available here. Now, if you've taken my classes before, you know I very often give step-by-step guides on how to work through equations or how to change layouts of your data sheet, how to do sorting or filtering or any procedural things that we might want to do in Excel. And there is some of that when working with the formatting here as well. But I would also like you to just consider exploring on your own. Create a chart that you don't need or that isn't of value to you and mess around with it, because there are a lot of things that you can change. Some of them you might find work out well for you, some of them might make a mess of it, and that's okay, because everything here can be adjusted and formatted in different ways. And again, this is intended to be a visual medium, so making it look better is a key part of that. And so we want to learn how to adjust these things and change them in any way that we can. Now, to do that, we can use the Format tab here of the Chart Tools at the top, and we can also work directly with the chart itself. Right now I'm working with this in the full having its own worksheet view where you see the whole thing here, but all of this works the same if you have it as an object within an existing worksheet as well. So no worries there, both of them work just fine. Looking at the Format tab that we have here going across the top, we can select different things, and you see when I click on different things, it changes what you are formatting here. So you see when I select the labels at the bottom, it's giving us different options for this. It says horizontal category. I can format the selection, return to match style. I can change the type by clicking on that, or clicking there, and there are, of course, many more options for this, as there always are. Some of these, of course, will look better than others. That's a little bit hard to read. That's a little bit better. And I can do the same thing when I click on the data series. In this case, I clicked on the attendance, and now we see I could change the look of that. I could change the shape fill. Two different colors that we have here. All kinds of options. You can also just click in the background while we're talking about using this bar here at the top, and you can grab and draw an arrow if you wanted to draw attention to something, and then I could change the appearance of that. because that is what's highlighted. And I could give it a glowing edge, and then I could put in a label, whatever I wanted to do. Now that doesn't really help me here, so I'm going to delete that. So using the toolbar, we can use some of these built-in choices. We can select different options here, and we can play around with the options that they provide for us with this. But we can also simply double-click on anything that we want here. And when we double-click on it, it pops open this Format Data Series thing that we saw earlier. Remember when we were talking about this before, when we were looking at our options with inserting objects into the chart. With this, when we format the data series, you can see we can plot the series on the primary secondary axis, because that's, I double-clicked it right now, it's currently on the primary one. If I had instead double-clicked on the line chart, it's currently on the secondary one. I go back to this one, primary. You can see series overlap, gap width. You can reduce this if you want to have things tighter to each other. You see that widens it out a little bit. I'm going to go back to 100. I thought that looked better. Close enough. And we can go to some other options here. We can change the shadow, glow. These are all appearance. You can make them a little bit transparent, so we can see through it a little bit there. We can also change the fill. Right now it's a solid fill. You can change it to gradient if you want. You can put in a picture. All kinds of changes that we can make. If you had graphics to associate with this, you could change individual ones if you wanted to have a picture fill for just this one square. So now I'm no longer on the entire series. Since I clicked on first the series and then on an individual bar, I could then change this to be I don't have a picture handy, so I'll go to online, up, and grab a texture there. And so you see you can change individual bars, or you can make that individual bar a gradient and change it in that way. So you can do things, and if I want to stop selecting the individual, I click outside of it, then I click back on it. You can do things all at once where you change the entire data series, or you can change the data point. As we do there, you see the title changes depending on what we click on. Make it a little brighter if I want. You can adjust the borders where appropriate. And you can see the more we play around with this, the more of a mess we can make, but you could find things that work out nicely for you as well. So say I double click the background here, it says Format Plot Area. I could change it to No Fill. Solid fill. Change the color in that way. And whenever you do this, you find all the little things that are not connected. So you can see the chart area is different from the axis area, so we would have to change this as well. This is why sometimes it's nice to use the pre-built styles, because they have this all encompassed. But if you want to make little changes to one thing or another, if you want to have the different bars be different colors, whatever it is, that can be done by double-clicking on whatever it is that you want to change and adjusting it accordingly. Smooth the line there, so it's a nice little curve. This is nice if you have a lot of data points and it's looking very jagged. You can change the color. The default color that they gave for that was a little bit drab, so if I say make this bright yellow, and as we go through this, we sometimes find things that we want to change. Of course, we're already on the secondary axis here, but if that was not, and if it was still hard to read down at the bottom, this is another way that you can change that. So that's the idea of formatting. You are controlling the appearance of the information that's put in. In my opinion, if you were going to be concerned about one option or the other, I would say that design is more important because that's controlling the content of what is in, and that's going to be the key first thing that you do. But as I've said a couple times now, this is intended to be visual, and so we want to control the appearance by using the formatting. Now, back to the design for a quick review. You can always change it back if you've made a mess to one of these pre-built things. To the formatting, we can see the options that we have as we go across here. And And with that, that brings us to the end of our introduction to working with charts. If there's more that you'd like to see with this, or you want to see any other classes on this topic offered, please let us know. We'd be happy to get into more complex charts or charts working with different kinds of data. Just let us know in either the comments or contact us here at the Bloomingdale Public Library, and we'd look forward to sharing more with you and spending more time on this topic. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a great day.